A while ago, I made a video about this man right here and his absolutely insane comments following a 1971 game against the Minnesota Vikings. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, the man you're watching is Buffalo Bills quarterback Dennis Shaw, as in the man who somehow won Offensive Rookie of the Year in 1970 and proceeded to do nothing else over the rest of his career. During this game, the Bills lost 19-0, and Shaw, the starting quarterback for it all, looked absolutely terrible, throwing no touchdowns and 2 interceptions while posting a passer rating of 26.5, which is worse than if it did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. Shaw was sacked 7 times, and the Bills finished the game with just 8 net passing yards. And after the game, Dennis Shaw had the audacity and the gall to somehow say that the loss was not his fault, and that he thought he played all right. In a game where you put up 0 points and play the most important position and turn the ball over and can't move the ball down the field, you're genuinely out there saying that the rest of the team was the reason that you lost and that you should be absolved of the blame? That is the last thing that any quarterback should do, and it was one of the many things that led to Shaw's downfall in Buffalo. Because if there's one rule of being a quarterback that feels like common sense, it's that when you win, it's because of we. And when you lose, it's because of me. Your team wins the game, you had the receivers run great routes, and the offensive line did a good job blocking, and we did a good job communicating with each other. Your team loses the game, I need to do a better job getting the ball on target and hitting my guys in stride and commanding the offense. That's the price you pay for being a quarterback. With great power and with great money comes great responsibility. What you do not do at all is say that you were not the reason that the team lost the game and that it was everyone else's fault and that you thought that you were all right. And this is especially true when you play like crap. I get airing frustrations if you play a near-perfect game but lose 45-42 because your defense stinks. Believe me, I get that. But when you play poorly and can't do anything, you have no right to be saying anything along those lines when you're the main man responsible for this. And I bring that up because this man right here is Green Bay Packers quarterback David Whitehurst. For an 8th round pick, the man had a pretty decent career. Of the 28 guys taken in the 8th round of the 1977 NFL Draft, 15 of them never even so much as played a single snap in the NFL, and only 7 of them played into the 1980s. So Whitehurst defied the odds and definitely had his moments as the signal caller for the Pack. You can learn a bit more about his career by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And yes, there were some games where Whitehurst looked really good and potentially looked like the franchise quarterback that the Packers have been trying to find since Bart Starr, but failing miserably at. Like a Week 2 game during the 1978 season against the New Orleans Saints, where the Packers won and he threw 4 touchdowns and no interceptions. And a 1977 game against the San Francisco 49ers, where the Packers won and Whitehurst, as a rookie, didn't throw a single interception while completing over 77% of his passes. But there were many more moments where Whitehurst did not look even the slightest bit good. For every good game he had, there were a solid 5 where he just did not seem to look the part. And there is a reason that he ended his NFL career with 28 touchdowns and 51 interceptions, with that coming out to a touchdown-to-interception ratio of 1-2, which obviously is really bad. The average quarterback around this time had a ratio in that 1-to-1 ballpark and had a passer rating just a hair below 74. Whitehurst was nearly at 1-2 with a passer rating below 60. In other words, Whitehurst was not that good of a quarterback. In fact, he was quite bad. And of the 18 quarterbacks in 1978 to throw at least 320 passes, so 20 passes per game on average, Whitehurst had, by far, the lowest passer rating of the bunch, which you can see on this chart here. In other words, Whitehurst was at fault for a lot of games that the Packers lost with him as the starter, and was a huge reason why, in 1978, out of 28 teams, Green Bay ranked 22nd in points scored, 24th in total yards, 23rd in passing yards, and 24th in passing touchdowns. So I want you to imagine that David Whitehurst actually said something along the lines of what Dennis Shaw said in 1971 after that Bills-Vikings game, and that David Whitehurst said that it wasn't his fault that his team lost the game, which was a game where he looked terrible and the Packers got blown out. Because on November 12, 1978, that's exactly what happened when the Green Bay Packers took on the Dallas Cowboys. And nearly half a century later, it deserves a deep dive today. Because if you ever needed a lesson in how not to play quarterback, both on the field and off the field, this is that lesson right here. Because this is the story behind what might just be, considering the circumstances, one of the dumbest quarterbacking moments in the over century-long history of the Green Bay Packers organization. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you may not have heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and for helping us grow this community. And with that in mind, let's talk about the time that Hurst was hurting. Before I talk about the actual incident in question and how insane it was, we need some context to understand the importance of the game, how the game was going, and of course, how the man of the hour, David Whitehurst, was playing in the contest. It's November 12, 1978. It's week 11 of the NFL season. And as we're squarely in the second half of the newly expanded 16-game season, we've got an NFC battle on our hands over at Milwaukee County Stadium between the Dallas Cowboys and the Green Bay Packers. To say that this was a big game would be putting it lightly, as 10 weeks into the season, both the Cowboys and Packers look like contenders to make it to the playoffs. The Cowboys, coming off of their win at Super Bowl 12 the year before, were definitely not as strong in 1978 as they were in 1977, but they were still 6-4, as despite losing 2 straight games, they were only 1 game back of the NFC East lead and were tied for the wild card lead. As for the Packers, they found themselves at 7-3, looking poised barring a late season collapse to make it to the playoffs for the first time since 1972, and only the second time since Vince Lombardi resigned as head coach. However, despite the Packers having a good record and leading the NFC Central by a game over the Minnesota Vikings, winners of the division each of the past 5 seasons, the Packers really needed to bounce back here, as they had lost 2 of their last 3 games and had been held to single digits in all of them, scoring just 19 points across the 3 games. The Packer offense that looked like one of the best in football at the start of the season was nowhere to be found as of late. Win this game, and you can turn your season around and get the offense back on track. Lose this game, and it's time to panic. And sure enough, as you might have been able to tell from the highlights of the game, or lowlights if you're a Packer fan, it was time to panic. Because when I say that the Cowboys dominated this one, I truly mean it. People expected the Cowboys to win. They entered the game as favorites. But I'm not sure anyone expected a game that was this ugly, where the Cowboys prevailed by a final score of 42-14 in a game that wasn't even that close, as the Packers scored a garbage time touchdown late in the 4th quarter, with the Cowboys leading at 42-7. When I say that this was complete and utter domination, I truly mean it. The Cowboys had 32 first downs compared to just 9 for the Packers, having roughly 7 first downs for every 2 that the Packers had. Dallas picked up 313 yards rushing, with Tony Dorsett and Robert Newhouse each going over 100 yards. Roger Staubach looked as sharp as ever, as the future Hall of Fame quarterback threw 2 touchdowns and no interceptions while posting a passer rating over 100. And the Cowboys had 537 yards of offense compared to just 142 for the Packers, more than tripling their output there. Keep in mind that some of the stats for the Packers offensively, as bad as they are inflated by a fourth quarter where the game was over at that point and the backups were in. With the starters out there, it was like one of the top college teams in the nation squaring off against a cupcake school out of the FCS. Nothing about this game, and I truly mean it, nothing about this game at all went right for the Packers, as they lost for the third time in the last 4 weeks, and once again, laid an egg offensively. Because now, let's talk about what happened on the offensive side of the ball with this man right here, David Whitehurst. Oh boy, this is going to be ugly. If you can find good examples of a starting quarterback playing well in a game where his team lost by 4 scores and trailed 42-7 at one point, I'd love to hear them, because this was not one of those games. Of all the games that David Whitehurst suited up in for the Packers, this might have been his worst. And trust me, that's saying something, because he played a lot of crap games for the team. David Whitehurst threw 16 passes. He completed 3 of them. When you go 3 for 16, that is something special. That is a completion percentage of 18%. Of the 46 games that Whitehurst played in his career where he threw more than 5 passes, unsurprisingly, this was his worst from a completion percentage standpoint. He also threw no touchdowns and 1 interception. When you combine the 31 passing yards that he had with the 2 sacks that he took, where he lost 5 yards combined, with Whitehurst under center, the Packers had just 26 net yards passing, as they were completely stifled. And when you factor all of those numbers in together, David Whitehurst finished this bloodbath with a passer rating of 13.5, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. Somehow, this wasn't the lowest passer rating of his career at that point, as he had a game against the Minnesota Vikings the year before, where in a 13-6 loss, he finished the game with a passer rating of 4.4. But even if it wasn't the worst, it was still pretty freaking bad. Whitehurst did not finish the game, as he got banged up at one point, only for the backup quarterback to get banged up, and for Bobby Douglas, the third stringer who you probably forgot ever played for the Packers until this very moment, because you associate him with the Bears, finishing the game. In other words, this performance by David Whitehurst was ugly with a capital U. But hey, bad games happen. Surely Whitehurst is going to take accountability for this, though, right? Whitehurst is going to go up there and say something along the lines of, I haven't looked good the last couple of weeks, and I really didn't look good tonight, and I've got to play better if this team is going to make it to the playoffs. If he said something like that, this would be a non-story. If Whitehurst went up there and said, my play today was embarrassing, and I take full responsibility for this performance, then, once again, this would be a non-story. If Whitehurst went up there and said, we've really been struggling lately, and I take the blame for that, and we've got to turn this around, because as bad as we played, and as bad as I played, we're still right in the playoff hunt, then once again, this would be a non-story. However, as you might have been able to guess, David Whitehurst did not say that. In fact, he did not say anything close to that. Because as David Whitehurst said, we just stunk it up out there. I did my share of messing up. Although I'm not going to say it was my fault we lost. Seriously, it's not my fault that we lost. We stunk, and sure, I messed up, but I didn't mess up as badly as some other people. It wasn't my fault that we were down 42-7 at one point. It wasn't my fault that I only completed 3 passes to my own teammates all game. It wasn't my fault that I finished the game with a passer rating below 20 and a completion percentage below 20 as well. I wasn't the reason that we lost this game. Don't point the finger at me. We all stunk out there. And I'm just so baffled by this statement and why the heck Whitehurst would feel the need to make it. Especially because the first half of that statement is more than fine. If he just stopped after saying, I did my fair share of messing up, this isn't a story. But for him to add on, I messed up, but guys, it wasn't my fault that we lost, is so selfish and so delusional and so nonsensical, especially when you were the starting quarterback and you were the most important player on the team. If I tell you right now that there's going to be a game in the NFL where a quarterback goes 3 for 16 and doesn't throw a touchdown, you're going to think that the team lost the game because of poor quarterback play. And that's a pretty fair assumption. Therefore, the blame lies squarely at the feet of the quarterback. No one's saying that you were the only reason the Packers lost. No one brought that up. If you played well, at the end of the day, the defense couldn't stop the run. They allowed over 300 yards on the ground. So the Packers still might have lost and probably still would have lost. But to just absolve yourself of any blame, or at least the majority of the blame, and say, nope, not my fault. For you to just delegate away your responsibilities as a quarterback, wanting the credit when things go well, but not wanting the blame when you play like crap? Come on, just come on. That's not what a good quarterback does. And more importantly, that's not what a good leader does. Anytime a player says, it's not my fault we lost, they're going to draw some eyebrows. However, there are at least some times where that makes sense. If Derek Thomas said that after that 7-sack game against the Seattle Seahawks, I'm not sure anyone's batting an eye, if that makes sense. But a 3 for 16 game where you did nothing at all and had less than 30 net passing yards as the starting quarterback? Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And it really isn't hard to see why Whitehurst and the Packer offense, or the Packers for that matter, never rebounded after this embarrassing blowout defeat, with the Packers, despite a 7-2 start, ending the year winning just one of their final 7 games to go to 8-7-1 and miss the playoffs with a late season choke that I think everyone saw coming after a performance like that. Again, when you play the quarterback position, you are the leader. You are the most important guy. You have added responsibilities. And if you don't play well, you take responsibility for it. Plain and simple, end of discussion, the buck stops with you. Of all the things to say after a game that you got annihilated in and played poorly in, this might have been the worst possible one. If this was a game of Family Feud, this might be the number one answer. David Whitehurst had his struggles under center, and this game against the Cowboys in Milwaukee, both from an on-the-field perspective with his performance and an off-the-field perspective with his post-game remarks, were a prime example of that. Because in 1978, while Cowboy players were saying, "How about them Cowboys?" David Whitehurst was saying, "How about them rest of the team? Wasn't my fault." Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.